The woman. No one wanted. The sheriff's voice cut through Dry Creek's town square like a blade. Elias Crow, you'll choose next. Mara Collins felt every eye turn toward her. The heavy girl nobody wanted, standing alone while other women were claimed like prizes. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The sheriff smirked, pointing directly at her. What about that one, Crow? Or are you too particular? The silence that followed was worse than mockery. Then Elias Crow, the widowed cowboy who hadn't spoken to a soul in months, stepped forward. His voice was steady, certain. I choose her. The town exploded in disbelief. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. And if you believe everyone deserves to be chosen for who they truly are, hit that like button and stay until the end. This is a story about the woman nobody wanted and the man who saw what no one else could. The Wyoming sun beat down on Dry Creek with the kind of heat that made tempers short and patience shorter. Mara Collins stood at the edge of the town square, her worn calico dress clinging to her broad shoulders, her hands twisted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Around her, women preened and whispered, adjusting their bonnets, smoothing their skirts, casting sidelong glances at the men gathering near the sheriff's platform. This wasn't a social gathering. This was a culling. Sheriff Borden had called it a community-building initiative, a fancy term for what it really was, a forced pairing of unmarried women with men who needed wives to prove their stake in the territory. Dry Creek was growing, and the territorial governor wanted settlers who'd stay, put down roots, build families. Single men were unreliable. Single women were burdens. So the sheriff had gathered them all like livestock and announced that by sundown everyone would be paired. Mara had known she'd be here. Her mother had made sure of it. Maybe someone will take pity on you, her mother had said that morning, not even looking up from her mending. Lord knows you haven't got much else to offer. The words had landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of hurt through Mara's chest. But she'd learned long ago not to flinch, not where anyone could see. She'd walked to the square alone. Her mother hadn't bothered to come. Why would she? There was no pride in watching your daughter stand among the unchosen, the unwanted, the women too plain or too poor or too something to have found their own matches. Too heavy, in Mara's case. Too broad-shouldered, too thick-waisted, too solid. She'd heard every variation of it since she was 12 years old, when her body had refused to stay small and delicate like the other girls. She'd grown tall and strong instead, built like her father, a man who'd left before she could remember him, leaving behind only his sturdy frame and a legacy of absence. Look at her, someone whispered behind her, standing there like she's got a chance. Mara's jaw tightened. She didn't turn around. She knew the voice, Emma Pritchard, who'd never missed an opportunity to remind Mara exactly where she stood in Dry Creek's social order. Maybe one of the old widowers will take her, another voice chimed in. Someone half-blind who won't notice. Soft laughter followed. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck, not from the sun, but from shame. She kept her eyes fixed on the platform where Sheriff Borden stood, his thumbs hooked in his belt, surveying the crowd like a man about to auction cattle. All right, folks, the sheriff called out, his voice booming across the square. Let's get this done proper. Men, step forward when I call your name. Choose a woman. Make it quick and make it stick. Governor's watching how we handle this, and I won't have Dry Creek looking like we can't manage our own affairs. Mara's stomach twisted. The whole thing felt wrong. Mechanical, cold, transactional. But wrong or not, it was happening, and she was standing in the middle of it. The first name was called. Thomas Garrett. A lean man in his 30s stepped forward, his hat in his hands. He scanned the women, then walked directly to a blonde girl near the front. Mary Hutchins, he said simply. Mary's face flushed pink, but she nodded. The sheriff marked something in his ledger. Done. Next, John Bellamy. It went on like that, man after man stepping forward, choosing, settling matters with a nod or a handshake. Some of the women looked pleased. Others looked resigned. A few looked terrified. Mara watched it all with a strange detachment, as if she were observing from a great distance. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself she'd known this was coming. But when the crowd began to thin and her name still hadn't been called, When she remained standing there, unchosen, while women younger and older than her walked away with husbands, the humiliation began to solidify into something harder, something that sat in her chest like a stone. Elias Crow. The name cut through her thoughts. Mara's head lifted. Elias Crow was a legend in Dry Creek, though not the kind that came with celebration. He was a widower, a man who'd lost his wife 2 years ago to fever and hadn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone since. He ran a cattle ranch outside town, kept to himself, came into Dry Creek only when necessary. He was tall, taller than most men Mara had ever seen, with broad shoulders, a weathered face, and eyes that seemed to look straight through people. He was also the kind of man women whispered about with longing and frustration, because he never looked back. Now he stood near the edge of the platform, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't move when the sheriff called his name again. Crow, the sheriff repeated, irritation creeping into his tone. Step up and choose. Elias didn't step up. He stood exactly where he was, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the crowd. I'm not choosing, he said. His voice was low, gravelly, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. The sheriff's face darkened. That's not how this works. Don't care how it works. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mara felt her pulse quicken. This was unprecedented. Men had grumbled, sure, but no one had outright refused. Sheriff Borden stepped down from the platform, crossing the space between himself and Elias with deliberate slowness. You saying you won't comply with the governor's order? I'm saying I won't be told who to marry. Elias's gaze shifted, finally landing on the sheriff. I buried my wife. I'm not replacing her because some politician in Cheyenne thinks it'll look good on paper. The sheriff's jaw worked. For a moment, Mara thought he might back down. Then his eyes slid past Elias, scanning the remaining women, and landed directly on her. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Fine, the sheriff said. You want to be difficult, Crow? Let's make this interesting. He raised his voice so the whole square could hear. Since you're so particular, I'll choose for you. Mara's breath caught. Her. The sheriff pointed directly at Mara. The Collins girl. She's the only one left, anyway. The crowd went silent. Then the laughter started, low at first, then building, rolling through the square like a wave. Mara felt it crash over her, drowning her, pulling her under. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. But she couldn't move. She could only stand there, frozen, as every eye in Dry Creek turned toward her with mockery or pity or both. Elias Crow turned too. His gaze found hers across the space, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. She expected disgust. She expected him to refuse outright, to walk away and let her stand there in the wreckage of her humiliation. Instead, he studied her. Not the way men usually looked at her, with dismissal or disdain, but with something quieter, something she couldn't name. Then he turned back to the sheriff. All right, he said. The laughter died instantly. What? The sheriff blinked. I said all right. Elias's voice didn't waver. I choose her. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of joke, some new form of cruelty she hadn't anticipated. But Elias wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. He was walking toward her, his boots heavy on the packed dirt. And when he stopped in front of her, he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You have a name? He asked. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Mara. He nodded once. Mara, he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then he looked back at the sheriff. We done here? The sheriff stared at him, mouth half open, clearly caught between anger and confusion. Finally, he waved a hand. Fine, it's done. Collins' girl goes with Crow. Elias turned back to Mara. You got belongings to collect? She shook her head mutely. Then let's go. He didn't offer his arm, didn't wait for her to respond. He just started walking toward the edge of the square, and after a frozen moment, Mara followed. Behind her, the whispers exploded. Did he really? Lost his mind. Feel sorry for her. Won't last a week. Mara heard it all, but it felt distant now, muffled, like she was underwater. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on following the tall, silent man who'd just claimed her in front of the entire town. Elias's horse was tied near the general store, a massive bay gelding that eyed Mara with what she could have sworn was skepticism. Elias untied the reins, then looked at her. "You ride?" "Not well." "You'll learn." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended a hand down to her. "Come on." Mara stared at his hand. It was broad, calloused, scarred across the knuckles. The hand of a man who worked hard and didn't apologize for it. She took it. His grip was firm but not rough as he pulled her up behind him. She had to hitch her skirt awkwardly to sit astride, and when she settled onto the horse's back, she had no idea where to put her hands. "Hold on," Elias said, and before she could ask to what, he urged the horse forward. Mara grabbed his waist instinctively, her fingers clutching the rough fabric of his shirt. The horse moved beneath them with a rolling gait that made her stomach lurch. But Elias sat easy in the saddle, his body absorbing the movement like he was part of the animal. They rode out of Dry Creek in silence. Mara didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she'd see the faces, the laughter, the mockery. She'd see her mother's house, the place she'd lived her whole life but never called home. So she looked forward instead, at the broad expanse of Elias Crow's shoulders, at the endless stretch of Wyoming territory opening up before them. The land rolled out in waves of gold and green, broken by dark clusters of pine and the distant purple shadows of mountains. The sky was enormous, impossibly blue, unmarred by clouds. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that didn't care if you appreciated it or not. After what felt like an hour, Mara finally found her voice. "Why did you choose me?" Elias didn't answer right away. The horse's hooves filled the silence, a steady rhythm against packed earth. "Didn't seem right," he said finally. "What they were doing? That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." Mara fell silent again. She didn't know what to make of him. He'd married her, or agreed to marry her at least, but he didn't seem angry about it. He didn't seem anything. He was like the land around them, vast, silent, impossible to read. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon when buildings finally appeared in the distance. Not a town, just a cluster of structures set against a backdrop of rolling hills. A ranch, Elias's ranch. As they drew closer, Mara could make out details. A sturdy barn, a corral with several horses, a low cabin built from dark timber with a stone chimney. It was simple, functional, built to last. Nothing fancy, but nothing falling apart either. Elias brought the horse to a stop near the cabin and dismounted, then reached up to help Mara down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then let go as soon as she was stable. "Cabin's small," he said, nodding toward the structure. "One room. I'll sleep in the barn until we figure things out." Mara blinked. "The barn?" "You'll have privacy." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was obvious. "There's a bed, a stove, a table, pantry stocked, water pumps out back." He started walking toward the barn, clearly considering the conversation finished. "Wait!" Mara called after him. He stopped, turned. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to ask. Every question that rose to her lips felt too big, too complicated. Finally, she settled on the simplest one. "What happens now?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and angles, impossible to read. "Now you rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll talk." Then he turned and walked into the barn, leaving Mara standing alone in front of a cabin that was supposed to be hers, in a life that was supposed to be hers, with a man she didn't know and didn't understand. She stood there until the last light bled from the sky. Then, finally, she walked to the cabin door and pushed it open. The interior was exactly as Elias had described. Simple, clean, functional. A bed with a quilt, a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined one wall, holding plates, cups, a few books. A trunk sat at the foot of the bed. It was more than Mara had expected. It was more than she'd had in her mother's house, where she'd slept on a cot in the kitchen and kept her few belongings in a crate under the washstand. She sat on the edge of the bed, the quilt soft beneath her hands. The silence pressed in around her, not oppressive, but vast. She could hear the wind moving through the grass outside, the distant call of a night bird, the creak of the barn as Elias moved around inside it. She'd been chosen. The thought circled in her mind, strange and slippery. She'd been chosen, but not the way she'd always imagined, not with love or even affection. She'd been chosen as an act of, what? Defiance? Pity? She didn't know, and not knowing felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, unable to see what lay below. Mara pulled off her boots, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Exhaustion pulled at her, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind wouldn't quiet. It kept replaying the moment in the square, Elias's voice saying, "I choose her," the shock on the sheriff's face, the way the laughter had died, the way Elias had looked at her. Not with pity, not with desire, with something steadier, something that felt almost like recognition. Eventually, despite everything, sleep came. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee. Mara sat up, disoriented. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The square, the choosing, the ride, the cabin. Elias. She stood, smoothed her wrinkled dress, and opened the cabin door. Elias was sitting on the porch step, a tin cup in his hands, his hat tipped back on his head. He glanced up when she appeared but didn't speak. "Morning," Mara said carefully. "Morning." He took a sip of coffee. "There's more in the pot. Cups on the shelf." She went back inside, found a cup, poured coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. When she came back out, she sat on the opposite end of the step, leaving space between them. They sat in silence for several minutes. Mara sipped her coffee and watched the land wake up around them. The horses in the corral were moving, shaking off the night. Birds were calling from the pines. The air smelled like sage and morning. "You meant what you said?" Mara asked finally. "About sleeping in the barn?" "I did." "That's not... people will talk. People always talk." Elias set his cup down. "What matters is what's true." Mara turned to look at him. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. The lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the way his hands were scarred and rough from work. He looked older than she'd thought. Tired, like a man who'd been carrying weight for a long time. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked again. This time he met her eyes. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly, "to be looked at like you're not worth seeing." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not cruel, just honest. So honest, it hurt. "My wife," Elias continued, his gaze drifting back to the land, "she was the daughter of a judge. Beautiful, educated, everything a man was supposed to want. I was a ranch hand with nothing but a strong back and a horse. Her father hated me. The whole town thought she was making a mistake." He paused, his jaw working. "She married me anyway, and for 2 years I had something I never thought I'd have. Then the fever came, and she was gone." His voice stayed level, but Mara could hear the grief underneath it, old and deep. "After she died, those same people who'd mocked me started treating me like I was tragic, like losing her made me noble somehow. I hated it. Still do." He looked at her again. "Yesterday, when that sheriff pointed at you, when those people laughed, I saw it. The way they looked at you, like you weren't a person, just something to be ashamed of." His voice hardened. "I won't be part of that. Won't stand by and let it happen." Mara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever, she couldn't remember anyone ever. "So that's why," Elias finished. "Not pity, not charity, just, I couldn't let them do that to you." The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more honest. "Thank you," Mara whispered. Elias nodded once, then stood. "You know how to cook?" The question was so abrupt it startled a laugh out of her. "Yes." "Good. I'm terrible at it. You handle meals, I'll handle the ranch work. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He walked toward the barn, then paused and looked back. "One more thing," he said. "You're not a servant here. You're not a burden. You pull your weight, I'll pull mine, and we'll manage. Understood?" Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Elias tipped his hat and disappeared into the barn. Mara sat on the porch step for a long time after he left, her coffee going cold in her hands. Around her, the ranch hummed with quiet life. The horses, the wind, the endless sky. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, she felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt almost like hope. She didn't know if this would work, didn't know if she could trust it. But for now, in this moment, sitting on a porch in the Wyoming sun with coffee in her hands, and a man who'd chosen her not because he wanted her, but because he'd seen her. For now, that was enough. Mara discovered that silence could be comfortable. The first week at the ranch passed in a rhythm she hadn't expected. Quiet, steady, almost peaceful. Elias left the cabin before dawn each morning, and she'd wake to the sound of his boots on the porch, the creak of the barn door, the low murmur of his voice talking to the horses. By the time she dressed and started the stove, he'd already be out checking fences or moving cattle or doing whatever mysterious work ranchers did before the sun fully rose. She'd make breakfast, biscuits, eggs when the hens cooperated, salt pork, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She'd set his plate on the porch step, and he'd find it there when he came back. He never ate inside, never crossed the threshold unless she specifically asked him to move something heavy or fix something broken. True to his word, he slept in the barn. At first, Mara had felt guilty about it. The cabin was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a stove that kept the chill off. The barn was drafty, full of hay dust and the smell of horses. But whenever she tried to suggest they switch, or that maybe they could work out some other arrangement, Elias would just shake his head. "You need your own space," he'd say. "I'm fine where I am." And that would be the end of it. The strange thing was, she believed him. He didn't seem resentful or put out. He seemed content almost. Like sleeping in a barn was a small price to pay for keeping his word. Mara had never known a man like that. Her father had been gone before she could form memories of him. The men in Dry Creek had been cruel or indifferent, looking through her like she was glass, something to see past on the way to something better. But Elias didn't look through her. He didn't look at her much at all, actually, but when he did, it was direct, honest, without judgment. It unnerved her more than cruelty ever had. On the 8th day, she was washing dishes when she heard a crash from the barn, followed by a string of cursing creative enough to make her eyebrows rise. She dried her hands and stepped outside. "You all right?" she called. The cursing stopped. There was a pause, then Elias appeared in the barn doorway, a hammer in one hand, his other hand dripping blood. "Fine," he said. "You're bleeding." "Notice that." Mara crossed the yard before she could second-guess herself. "Let me see." Elias held up his hand. A gash ran across his palm, deep enough to be worrying. Blood welled up fast, dripping onto the dirt. "Inside," Mara said firmly. "Now." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he sighed and followed her into the cabin. It was the first time he'd been inside since he'd shown her the place that first night. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room, too big for the small space, while Mara pulled out the medical kit she'd found in the trunk. Basic supplies, bandages, a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds. "Sit," she ordered, pointing at one of the chairs. He sat. She took his hand, examining the cut. It was clean, at least, not ragged. She poured whiskey over it, and Elias hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "What happened?" she asked, wrapping the wound with steady hands. "Hammer slipped. My fault for not paying attention." "What were you working on?" "Doesn't matter." Mara tied off the bandage, then looked up at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, surprised, maybe, or puzzled. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." He flexed his hand carefully. "You're good at this." "My mother used to get headaches, bad ones. I learned to take care of things." She put the supplies away, not looking at him. She didn't handle pain well." "And you?" The question caught her off guard. "What about me?" "You handle pain well?" Mara's hand stilled. It was such a simple question, but it cut right to something she'd never let herself think about too closely. Did she handle pain well, or had she just gotten so used to it that she didn't know the difference anymore? "I handle what I have to," she said finally. Elias nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. He stood, testing his hand again. "Thank you." You're welcome. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mara? Yes? You don't have to keep leaving my meals on the step. I can eat at the table, with you, if you want. Her heart did something strange in her chest. I thought you wanted space. I want you to have space. There's a difference. He met her eyes. But if you're comfortable with it, I'd rather not eat alone. Been doing that too long already. Before she could answer, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Mara stood in the empty cabin, staring at the closed door, her pulse racing for reasons she couldn't name. That evening, she set 2 plates at the table. When Elias came in, he washed up at the basin, then sat across from her without comment. They ate in silence, venison stew, cornbread, canned peaches for dessert. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It was just quiet, the comfortable kind. Halfway through the meal, Elias spoke. You miss it? The town? Mara almost laughed. No, not even a little? There's nothing there for me. There never was. She pushed a piece of meat around her plate. My mother made that clear enough. She didn't come to see you off. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. No, she didn't. That bother you? It should, shouldn't it? Mara set down her fork. A daughter should care if her mother doesn't love her, should feel something about it. Do you? I used to. I used to try so hard to make her proud, to be what she wanted, smaller, quieter, prettier, anything that might make her look at me like I was worth something. The words came easier than she expected, maybe because Elias was listening without judgment, without pity. But you can only break yourself into smaller pieces for so long before you realize there's nothing left to break. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, my father used to say I'd never amount to anything, said I was too soft, too weak, that I'd end up face down in a ditch somewhere. He took a sip of coffee. Worked myself half to death trying to prove him wrong. Then one day I realized I didn't care anymore what he thought. I was alive. I was making my own way. That was enough. What happened to him? Don't know. Haven't seen him in 15 years. Elias shrugged. Some people aren't meant to be in your life, even if they're blood. Mara absorbed that. It felt revolutionary somehow, the idea that you could just let go, that you didn't owe your suffering to the people who'd caused it. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For telling me that. For, she gestured vaguely, for this. All of it. Elias's expression softened slightly. You don't have to keep thanking me, Mara. This is your home now. You belong here. The words settled over her like a blanket. Warm, unexpected, terrifying in their kindness. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. They finished the meal in silence, and when Elias left for the barn, Mara caught herself wishing he'd stayed longer. The days began to blur together after that, each one building on the last. Elias started teaching her about the ranch, how to recognize when a horse was favoring a leg, how to mend tack, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. She was clumsy at first, her hands unused to the work, but he was patient in a way that surprised her. No, like this, he'd say, demonstrating how to properly loop a rope. See? You're trying to muscle it. Let the rope do the work. She'd try again, fail again, and he'd just nod and say, better. Try once more. Never frustrated, never condescending. Just steady. One afternoon, she was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She tensed instinctively. Visitors meant questions, meant scrutiny, meant people from town who'd want to know how the odd pairing was working out so they could report back with gossip. But the rider who appeared wasn't from Dry Creek. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He tipped his hat to Mara as he dismounted. Afternoon, ma'am. Name's Henry Walsh. I run the ranch to the east. Is Elias around? Mara nodded toward the corral. Working with the horses. Much obliged. Henry started to walk past, then paused. You must be his wife. Heard he'd gotten married. Welcome to the territory. There was no mockery in his voice, no judgment, just genuine warmth. Thank you, Mara managed. She watched Henry walk to the corral, watched him and Elias shake hands and fall into easy conversation. After a few minutes, both men headed toward the cabin. Mara, Elias called. Henry's staying for supper. That all right? It wasn't really a question. Of course it was all right. It was his ranch. But he was asking anyway, giving her the choice. Of course, she said. She made extra biscuits, stretched the stew with more vegetables, set 3 places at the table. When the men came in, Henry removed his hat and smiled at her again. Smells wonderful, Mrs. Crow. Mrs. Crow. The name hit her like a shock. She'd become Mara Crow without even thinking about it, without the formality of a ceremony or a preacher's blessing. Just a choice made in a town square and a name that had followed. Thank you, she said, ladling stew into bowls. The conversation over dinner was easy, comfortable. Henry talked about his own ranch, about the challenges of the territory, about mutual acquaintances. He treated Mara like she'd always been part of the landscape, asking her opinion on things, including her in the discussion naturally. It was such a small thing, but it made her throat tight. After supper, Henry pushed back from the table with a satisfied sigh. Best meal I've had in months. My wife passed 3 years back and I still can't cook worth a damn. I'm sorry for your loss, Mara said. Appreciate it. Henry's smile was sad but genuine. She was a good woman, made that house a home. I still miss her every day. He looked between Mara and Elias. But life goes on, doesn't it? We find new ways to keep living. Elias walked Henry out to his horse. Mara started cleaning up, but through the window she could see them talking in low voices by the corral. At one point, Henry clapped Elias on the shoulder, said something that made Elias actually smile. A real smile, small but unmistakable. When Elias came back inside, his expression had shifted. Not quite happy, but lighter, somehow. He's a good man, Mara said. He is. Elias picked up a dish towel, started drying plates without being asked. He and his wife used to have us over for dinner when Sarah was alive. Never treated me like I wasn't good enough for her. Never made me feel small. Sarah was your wife? Elias nodded. Sarah Catherine Crow. Died 2 years ago this October. Mara wanted to ask more. What she'd been like, how they'd met, what it felt like to lose someone you'd loved that much. But the questions felt too intimate, too invasive. Instead, she said, Henry seems to think well of you. Henry thinks well of most people. It's his nature. Elias set down a dried plate. But yeah, he's one of the few who didn't change after Sarah died. Didn't start treating me different. People did that? Some pitied me. Some thought I should have remarried right away, like Sarah could just be replaced. He stopped, jaw tight. Some thought maybe it was for the best, that I could find someone more suitable now. The anger in his voice was quiet but unmistakable. Mara understood it completely. I'm sorry, she said. Not your fault. Elias hung up the dish towel. Point is, Henry's one of the good ones, and he liked you. I could tell. He was being polite. He was being genuine. There's a difference. Elias looked at her directly. You're easy to like, Mara. You just don't believe it yet. The words hit her like a punch to the sternum. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to process the casual way he'd said it, like it was obvious, like it was true. Elias didn't wait for a response. He headed for the door, then paused. I fixed the step on the porch, the one that was loose, and I'm working on something in the barn. Should be done in a few days. What is it? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You'll see. Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with dishes and questions and a strange, unfamiliar warmth in her chest that she didn't quite know what to do with. 3 days later, she found out what he'd been working on. She came out of the cabin one morning to find a rocking chair on the porch. Simple, sturdy, made from smooth pine. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, the kind of thing made by hands that knew their work. Elias was by the corral, watching her. You made this? She called. He nodded. Why? Figured you might like somewhere to sit, in the evenings. Mara ran her hand over the chair's arm. The wood was smooth, carefully sanded, not a splinter to be found. She sat down slowly, and the chair rocked gently, perfectly balanced. From this spot, she could see the whole sweep of the valley, the mountains in the distance, the rolling grassland, the barn and corral, and all of it bathed in morning light. It was the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever done for her. She looked at Elias, and he was already looking away, suddenly interested in checking a fence post that didn't need checking. "Thank you," she said. He just tipped his hat and went back to work. That evening, Mara sat in the rocking chair and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. Elias was in the barn, and she could hear him moving around, the familiar sounds of end-of-day tasks. She thought about the past few weeks, about how her life had changed in ways she couldn't have imagined, about how she'd gone from being the woman no one wanted to being someone's wife, even if it was a marriage in name only, even if it was based on defiance rather than love. But it was something. It was hers. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to think that might be enough. She was still sitting there when Elias emerged from the barn, brushing hay from his shirt. He saw her and paused. "You eaten yet?" he called. "Not yet." "Mind if I wash up and join you?" "I'd like that." He disappeared around the back of the cabin to the pump. Mara stood, went inside, and started preparing dinner. It had become routine now, this quiet domesticity, this partnership that wasn't quite friendship, but wasn't quite anything else either. They ate together, talking about small things. The weather. The horses. A hawk Mara had seen circling that afternoon. Nothing profound, nothing heavy, just the ordinary rhythm of two people sharing space and time. After dinner, Elias helped with dishes again, another habit that had formed without discussion. As they worked side by side, Mara found herself wondering what people in Dry Creek would think if they could see this. The odd couple making a life together. Not passionate, not romantic, but real in a way that felt more solid than any of the pairings she'd witnessed in that square. "You ever regret it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Choosing me?" Elias's hands stilled in the wash water. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "No," he said simply. "Not once." "You?" "Regret leaving Dry Creek?" Mara considered. "No, but I wonder sometimes if you got the short end of this deal." "How do you figure?" "You could have chosen someone else, someone prettier or more skilled, or—" "Mara." He said her name firmly, and she fell silent. "I chose you because I wanted to, not because I had to, not because there weren't other options. I saw you standing there and I made a choice. I don't regret choices I make on purpose." "But you don't know me." "I'm getting to know you." He dried his hands, leaned against the counter. "And what I know so far, I like. You're strong. You work hard. You don't complain. You make a damn good cup of coffee." A slight smile. "And you patched up my hand without fainting at the blood." Despite herself, Mara smiled. "That's a low bar." "You'd be surprised." He sobered. "Look, I know this isn't what either of us planned, and I know it's strange, this setup we've got. But it's working, isn't it? We're figuring it out." "We are," Mara admitted. "Then that's enough for now. We don't have to have it all figured out. We just have to keep showing up." Mara nodded, something loosening in her chest. Keep showing up. That she could do. That she'd been doing her whole life, even when no one noticed. But now someone did notice. Someone was here, showing up right alongside her. It wasn't love. It wasn't even romance. But maybe it was the beginning of something that could become those things, given time and patience and two people willing to see each other clearly. As Elias headed back to the barn and Mara settled into her bed that night, she thought about the rocking chair on the porch, about hands that built something just for her comfort, about a man who slept in a barn to give her space but sat at her table because she wanted company. She thought about all of it, and for the first time in her life, she fell asleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The nightmare came on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Mara had arrived at the ranch. She woke gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs, the echo of laughter still ringing in her ears. In the dream, she'd been back in Dry Creek, standing in that square again, but this time when Elias had chosen her, he'd started laughing too. Everyone had laughed, and she'd looked down to find herself shrinking, getting smaller and smaller until she disappeared completely. Mara sat up in the darkness, pressing her hands to her face. Just a dream. It was just a dream. But her hands were shaking, and her breath wouldn't slow, and suddenly the cabin felt too small, the walls pressing in. She threw off the quilt and stumbled to the door, pushing it open to gulp down the cool night air. The sky was enormous above her, scattered with more stars than she'd ever seen in town. The moon hung low and bright, painting everything in silver. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, so much space, so much emptiness, and her just a speck in the middle of it all. "Mara?" She jumped. Elias was standing near the barn, a lantern in his hand, still dressed. He must have been checking on one of the horses. The mare had been restless lately, close to foaling. "I'm fine," she said automatically. He didn't move closer, but he didn't leave either. "You don't look fine." "It was just a dream." "Bad one?" She wanted to deny it, to send him away, to handle this the way she'd always handled everything. Alone, in silence, swallowing it down until it stopped hurting. But something about the darkness, about the way he was just standing there without judgment, made the truth spill out. "I was back there, in the square, and everyone was laughing, and Her voice broke. "I disappeared. I just disappeared, and no one even noticed." Elias set the lantern down carefully. "You didn't disappear. You're right here. I know that. I know it was just a dream. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I'm here, that you actually—" She couldn't finish. "That I actually chose you?" Elias's voice was gentle but firm. "I did, and I'd do it again." "Why?" The question came out raw, desperate. "I need to understand why." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked toward her slowly, stopping a few feet away. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and plains, but his eyes were clear. "You want the truth?" he asked. "Yes. When Sarah died, I stopped seeing people clearly. Everyone became a blur, voices offering condolences I didn't want, faces showing pity I couldn't stand. I went through the motions, kept the ranch running, but I wasn't really there. I was just existing." He looked up at the stars. "Then that day in the square, I saw you, really saw you, and I recognized something." "What?" "Someone who'd been made invisible for so long they'd started to believe they actually were." He met her eyes again. "I know what that's like. To be looked through, looked past, to have people decide who you are before you even open your mouth. Sarah's father did that to me. Looked at me and saw dirt, nothing more. Didn't matter what I did or who I was was already dismissed." Mara's throat tightened. "How did you stand it?" "Sarah," he said simply. "She saw me. Not what her father wanted her to see. Not what the town expected. Me. The actual person." His voice roughened. "When she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd never be seen like that again. But then I saw you standing there, and I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "I thought maybe we could see each other, both of us. Maybe that could be enough." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and more vulnerable than anything Mara had expected. She realized she was crying, tears sliding silently down her face. "I see you," she whispered. "I don't know if that matters, but I do. I see you." Something shifted in Elias's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "It matters," he said quietly. "It matters more than you know." They stood there in the moonlight, the space between them charged with understanding. Then Elias cleared his throat. "Mare's close to foaling. I should stay with her tonight. But if you want company, you could sit with me, in the barn." It was an offering, not a demand. A way to not be alone without crossing boundaries. Mara nodded. "I'd like that." She grabbed a shawl from inside the cabin, and they walked to the barn together. The mare was in a corner stall, her sides heaving, her eyes rolling nervously. Elias moved to her immediately, his voice dropping to a low, soothing murmur as he stroked her neck. "Easy, girl. Easy now. You're all right." Mara sat on a hay bale, watching him work. His hands were gentle despite their size, his movements calm and sure. The mare responded to him, her breathing slowing, her body relaxing slightly. "How long until she foals?" Mara asked. "Could be hours, could be morning. First foals are unpredictable." He didn't look away from the horse. You don't have to stay. You should get some rest. I'm not leaving. He glanced at her then, and she saw surprise flicker across his face, but all he said was, All right then. The hours passed slowly. Elias monitored the mare, checking her progress, keeping her calm. Mara stayed on the hay bale, sometimes watching him, sometimes just letting her mind drift. The barn was warm, filled with the smell of hay and horse and leather. It was peaceful in a way the cabin wasn't, less lonely somehow. Around 3 in the morning, the mare's labor intensified. Elias rolled up his sleeves, positioned himself carefully, talking to the horse in that same low, steady voice. That's it. You're doing fine. Just breathe through it. Mara found herself standing, moving closer without conscious thought. Can I help? Hand me that towel, the clean one. She did. Then she stayed close, ready if he needed anything else. The mare made a sound of distress, and Elias's jaw tightened. Come on, girl, you can do this. And then, with a rush that made Mara gasp, the foal was born, slick and trembling and impossibly fragile. The mare turned immediately, beginning to clean her baby with long, careful licks. Elias sat back on his heels, breathing hard. There was blood on his hands, sweat on his forehead, and something like wonder in his eyes. Beautiful, he murmured. Mara knelt beside him, watching the foal struggle to stand on stick-thin legs, watched it fall and try again, watched the mare encourage it with soft nickers. Life, brand new and determined, fighting to exist. It's a miracle, she whispered. Every time, Elias agreed. He stood, went to the pump to wash his hands, then came back with fresh water for the mare. The horse drank deeply while her foal finally, triumphantly, managed to stay standing. Elias looked at Mara, and she looked back, and something passed between them, shared awe, shared exhaustion, shared experience. They'd witnessed something together. They'd stayed through the darkness and come out the other side. Thank you, Elias said, for staying, for helping. I didn't do much. You were here. That's not nothing. The sun was starting to rise, painting the barn in shades of gold. Mara realized they'd spent the entire night together, and it had felt natural, easy, not awkward or forced. I should make breakfast, she said. I should clean up here. Meet you at the cabin in an hour? She nodded, and as she walked across the yard in the early morning light, she felt different somehow, lighter, like something had shifted in the night, some barrier had come down, and she and Elias had moved closer to understanding each other. When he came to breakfast, they didn't talk about the birth. They didn't talk about her nightmare or his confession in the moonlight. They just ate together, and it was enough. But that afternoon, when Mara went back to check on the mare and foal, she found Elias already there, leaning against the stall door with a soft expression on his weathered face. What should we call her? He asked as Mara approached. The foal? Yeah, you should name her. You were there when she was born. Mara looked at the little horse, all legs and curiosity, already exploring her stall with brave, wobbling steps. Hope, she said suddenly. Let's call her Hope. Elias considered, then nodded. Hope. I like it. They stood side by side, watching Hope nurse while her mother stood patient and proud. It felt companionable, comfortable. Mara found herself speaking without planning to. I was engaged once, back in Dry Creek. She felt Elias glance at her but kept her eyes on the horses. His name was Thomas. He worked at the mill. We'd known each other since we were children, and when I was 19, he asked me to marry him. She swallowed hard. I thought maybe someone finally saw me, finally wanted me. What happened? His friends made fun of him, called him desperate, said he could do better, and The old pain rose up, sharp as ever. He came to my mother's house and said he'd made a mistake, that he'd been confused, that he hoped I'd understand. My mother just nodded like she'd expected it all along. I'm sorry. The worst part wasn't that he left. It was that I wasn't even surprised. I'd already half believed I wasn't good enough for him, so when he confirmed it, it just felt like the truth finally catching up. She turned to face Elias. That's why I can't quite believe this. You, this place, any of it. Because I spent so long being told I wasn't worth choosing that I don't know how to accept that someone actually did. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Thomas was a fool. You don't know that. I know enough. I know he chose other people's opinions over his own judgment. I know he hurt you to save his own pride. That makes him a fool in my book. Mara felt tears prick her eyes again. You barely know me. I know you stayed up all night to help with a horse that isn't yours. I know you keep the cabin cleaner than it's been in years and never complain about how small it is. I know you patched up my hand without flinching and made Henry Walsh smile for the first time since his wife died. Elias's voice was steady, certain. I know you're stronger than you think you are. And I know Thomas was an idiot for letting you go. The words washed over her like a benediction. Mara wanted to protest, to argue, to deflect, but she was so tired of deflecting, so tired of not letting herself have anything good. Thank you, she said instead. Just the truth. They walked back to the cabin together as afternoon shadows stretched long across the yard. At the door, Elias paused. I've been thinking, he said, about the sleeping arrangements. Mara's stomach clenched. Oh? The barn's fine for now, but winter's coming. Gets cold out there. Real cold. He looked uncomfortable, like he was trying to figure out how to say something difficult. I'm not suggesting, I wouldn't presume, but maybe we could rig up a curtain, divide the cabin, give us both privacy, but keep us both warm. Relief flooded through her. That makes sense. Yeah? Yeah. I've been worried about you freezing out there, but didn't know how to... She gestured helplessly. I didn't want you to think I was... I know what you weren't suggesting. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both so busy trying not to overstep that we're practically tiptoeing around each other. Mara laughed, surprised by the sound. We are, aren't we? Tell you what, tomorrow I'll ride into Dry Creek, get supplies for a proper partition. We'll set it up, make this work for both of us. Sound good? The thought of him going back to town made her nervous. People will talk. People always talk. Doesn't make what they say true. He met her eyes. Unless you don't want me going? No, it's fine. We need supplies anyway, just... She hesitated. Be careful. Always am. But the next morning when Elias saddled up to leave, Mara found herself walking out to see him off. He swung up onto his horse, then looked down at her. Anything specific you want from town? Maybe some fabric for curtains, and she felt herself blush. I'd like to make a proper dress. Something that fits better. I'll get you fabric. Any particular color? Blue, if they have it. Blue it is. He tipped his hat. I'll be back before dark. She watched him ride away, the horse's hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Then she turned back to the cabin and the day's work, trying not to think about what people would say to him, how they'd look at him, whether they'd make him regret choosing her. The day passed slowly. Mara cleaned, baked bread, checked on Hope and her mother, tried to keep busy. But her mind kept drifting to Elias riding through Dry Creek streets, facing down the stairs and whispers. When the sun started sinking toward the mountains and he still hadn't returned, worry began to gnaw at her. She stood on the porch, straining her eyes toward the horizon, watching for any sign of movement. Finally, just as twilight was settling in, she saw him, a dark shape against the dimming sky, riding steadily toward home. Home. When had she started thinking of it that way? Elias dismounted near the barn, and Mara hurried over. He looked tired, his jaw tight, but he managed a small smile when he saw her. Got everything, he said, gesturing to the saddlebags. Including 5 yards of blue fabric. Woman at the general store said it was the prettiest they had. How was it? The town? He busied himself unsaddling the horse. Fine. Elias. He sighed, set the saddle aside. They stared. They whispered. Sheriff made a comment about how domestic life must be treating me well since I was buying fabric. Henry Walsh was there, though. He told the sheriff to mind his own business. A slight smile. That helped. I'm sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. I knew what I was walking into. He pulled a package from the saddlebag and handed it to her. But I got you something else, too. Mara unwrapped the brown paper to find a book, A real book, bound in leather, with gold lettering on the spine. Jane Eyre, she read aloud. Woman at the store said it's good. About a woman who finds her own way, makes her own choices. Thought you might like it. Mara's vision blurred. A book. He'd bought her a book just because he thought she'd like it. Not because it was practical or necessary, but because he'd thought of her, wanted to give her something that would bring her joy. Thank you, she managed. Thank you. You're welcome. He looked pleased, almost shy. Now come on, let's get this fabric inside before the dew sets in. Tomorrow we'll work on that partition. They carried the supplies into the cabin, and Mara set the book carefully on the table like it was something precious. Because it was. Not just the book itself, but what it represented. Someone thinking about her, caring about her happiness, seeing her as a person worth giving gifts to. That night, she sat in her rocking chair and read the first chapter by lamplight, while Elias worked in the barn. The words transported her to a different place, a different time, but the emotions were achingly familiar. Jane Eyre understood what it was to be overlooked, underestimated, to be told you were less than you were. But Jane fought back. Jane insisted on her own worth. Mara was still reading when Elias emerged from the barn and paused at the bottom of the porch steps. Good? He asked, nodding at the book. So good I don't want to stop. Then don't. I'll see you in the morning. But he didn't move toward the barn. He stood there, looking at her in the lamplight, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Mara, he said quietly, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I chose you. And I'm glad you stayed. Before she could respond, he was walking away, disappearing into the barn's dark interior. Mara sat very still, the book forgotten in her lap, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She thought about Thomas, who'd left because other people told him to. She thought about her mother, who'd never fought for her, never defended her, never seen her value. And then she thought about Elias, who'd stood in a town square and claimed her in front of everyone, who slept in a barn to give her space but sat at her table because she wanted company, who bought her books and built her rocking chairs and looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. She didn't know what this was between them. It wasn't romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something real and solid and worth holding on to. And for the first time in her life, Mara let herself believe that maybe she deserved it. The partition went up on a Saturday morning, dividing the cabin into two distinct spaces with a heavy canvas curtain that Elias had reinforced with wooden slats. He'd been meticulous about it, measuring twice, making sure Mara's side had the window for light, the stove for warmth, and enough room to move around comfortably. His side was smaller, just enough space for a bedroll and a trunk, but he'd insisted that was all he needed. I'm in here to sleep, he'd said when she protested. You're in here to live. There's a difference. Now, a week after the partition had been installed, they'd settled into a new rhythm. Elias still rose before dawn, but instead of leaving the cabin entirely, he'd simply slip out from behind his curtain, dress quietly by the stove's dying embers, and head out to start the day's work. Mara would wake to the sound of him moving around, the soft scrape of the coffee pot, the gentle click of the door closing behind him. It felt like sharing a life, not just a space, but an actual life. The blue fabric had become a dress, simple but well-fitted, cut to flatter rather than hide. Mara had sewn it by lamplight over several evenings, and the first time she'd worn it, Elias had stopped mid-step on his way to the corral and just stared. What? She'd asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. Just, you look nice, real nice. The compliment had warmed her for days, but it was the little things that had begun to shift the foundation beneath them. The way Elias had started leaving wildflowers on the table, just a handful of prairie blooms in a tin cup, nothing fancy, but always there when she came in from feeding the chickens. The way Mara had learned how he took his coffee and had it ready before he even asked. The way they'd developed a shorthand, communicating with glances and gestures like people who'd known each other for years rather than weeks. The way she'd caught herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, noticing the strength in his hands, the quiet competence in everything he did. The way he'd started smiling more, real smiles that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. It was early October when everything changed. Mara was kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as Elias emerged from the barn, his posture immediately tense. 3 riders came into view, and Mara's stomach dropped when she recognized the one in front. Sheriff Borden. The men dismounted near the corral, and the sheriff's eyes swept over the ranch with an assessing look that made Mara's skin crawl. The 2 men with him were deputies, young, nervous-looking, their hands resting too casually near their gun belts. "Crow, so?" the sheriff said by way of greeting. "Sheriff." Elias's voice was carefully neutral. "What brings you out here?" "Official business. Territorial governor wants a census update, making sure all the pairings from the gathering are still intact. Everyone's where they're supposed to be." His gaze slid to Mara. "That the Collins girl?" "That's my wife," Elias said, his tone hardening slightly. "Her name is Mara." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Your wife, is she? You 2 make it official with a preacher? Don't need a preacher to make a marriage real. Law might disagree with you there." The sheriff pulled out a notebook, made a show of consulting it. "Says here you chose her under territorial mandate. That makes this a provisional arrangement until it's properly sanctioned." Mara's heart started pounding. She didn't like where this was going. "What are you getting at, Borden?" Elias asked. "Just doing my job, making sure the territory's interests are being served, making sure arrangements that were made under duress are actually functioning as intended." He looked past Elias to Mara. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. Privately." "No," Elias said flatly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. She's not answering questions without me present." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I'm an officer of the territorial government, Crow. You don't tell me how to conduct my business. And this is my land, my home. You want to ask questions? You ask them where we can both hear." The tension stretched tight between them. One of the deputies shifted nervously. Finally, the sheriff shrugged. "Fine. Have it your way." He turned to Mara. "Mrs. Crow, are you here of your own free will?" "Yes," Mara said, keeping her voice steady. "Has your husband mistreated you in any way?" "No." "You're sure about that? Because if you're being coerced or intimidated, there are provisions for—" "I'm not being coerced," Mara interrupted, anger flaring hot in her chest. "I'm here because I choose to be here." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. "You've changed," he said finally. "Put on some weight, looking healthier, almost pretty even." The comment was designed to be insulting, a reminder that she'd once been beneath notice, that any improvement was noteworthy because she'd started from such a low place. But before Mara could respond, Elias stepped forward. "You've conducted your census, Sheriff. Time for you to leave." "Not quite done yet." Borden didn't move. "See, there's been talk in town. People wondering how this arrangement is working out. Whether someone like Crow here might be taking advantage of a woman who didn't have many options." "Taking advantage?" Elias's voice dropped dangerously low. "You mean like you did? Forcing her to stand in that square, pointing at her like she was livestock?" "I was following territorial orders." "You were enjoying yourself." The sheriff's face flushed. "Watch yourself, Crow." "Or what? You'll haul me in for defending my wife's dignity, for calling out your cruelty?" "I could cite you for non-compliance with territorial mandates. Could recommend this arrangement be dissolved." Mara's blood went cold. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "You can't do that." The sheriff looked at her with something like satisfaction. "Actually, ma'am, I can. Provisional arrangements can be terminated if they're deemed unsuitable or if either party wishes to dissolve." "Neither party wishes to dissolve anything," Mara said, her voice shaking with anger now. "This is my home. Elias is my husband. You don't get to come here and threaten that just because you don't like how it looks." "I'm not threatening anything. I'm explaining the law." "You're looking for an excuse to punish him," Mara shot back. "To punish both of us, because we didn't play along with your humiliation game the way you wanted us to." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mrs. Crow." "Or what? You'll threaten me too?" She was trembling now, but not with fear, with fury. Years of swallowed anger, of silent endurance, of letting people demean her without fighting back, all of it was surging up and demanding release. "You've already made it clear what you think of me. what everyone in that town thinks of me. But I don't care anymore. I don't care what you think or what they say because I have something here that I never had there. I have someone who chose me, who sees me, who treats me like I matter." She was breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. Beside her, Elias had gone very still. The sheriff looked between them, his jaw working. "This is quite the performance." "It's the truth," Mara said, "and if you try to take it away from us, I'll fight you. I'll go to the territorial governor myself if I have to. I'll tell him exactly how you conducted that gathering, how you mocked and humiliated people, how you pointed at me like I was a joke. Nobody would believe you. Maybe not, but I'd make sure everyone heard me say it." The silence that followed was absolute. The deputies looked acutely uncomfortable. The sheriff's face had gone red, then white, then settled into a kind of cold fury. "I'll be watching this situation," he said finally. "Any sign that things aren't as they should be, and I'll be back, with authority to act." "You do that," Elias said quietly, "and I'll be ready." The sheriff mounted his horse, jerked the reins harder than necessary. "Good day, Mrs. Crow. Crow." They watched the three men ride away, dust rising in their wake. Mara's hands were still shaking, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She'd never spoken to anyone like that in her life, had never defended herself so fiercely, so publicly. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "Mara." Elias's voice was soft. She turned to look at him, and the expression on his face stole her breath. He was looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time, with wonder and respect and something else she didn't dare name. "That was—" He stopped, shook his head. "You were incredible. I was angry. You were brave." He stepped closer. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Borden like that. He's used to people cowering." "I'm tired of cowering," Mara said, surprised by the truth of it. "I've spent my whole life making myself smaller, quieter, trying not to take up space or cause trouble. And where did it get me? Nowhere. Just more invisible, more easy to dismiss." She looked up at him, "But when he threatened to take this away, to take you away, I couldn't just stand there and let it happen." Something shifted in Elias's eyes. "Mara, I know this isn't a real marriage," she continued, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know you chose me to save me from humiliation, and I'm grateful for that, I am. But it's become real to me. This place, this life, you, it's all become real, and the thought of losing it, it's real to me too." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at him. "It's real to me too," Elias repeated, his voice rough. "This marriage, this life, whatever it started as, it's not that anymore. Not for me." "What is it then?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady against hers. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I look forward to seeing you every morning. I know I bring you flowers because I like the way you smile when you see them. I know when that sheriff threatened to take you away, I would have fought him with my bare hands to keep you here." His grip tightened slightly. "I know I think about you when I'm working. I know I listen for your voice, your footsteps. I know you've become the best part of my day." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Elias, I'm not saying this to pressure you. I'm not expecting anything. I just, after what you said to the sheriff about choosing me, about me choosing you, I needed you to know. You're not the only one who'd fight to keep this." They stood there in the afternoon sun, hands clasped, the space between them charged with possibility. Mara could feel her heart hammering, could feel the weight of the moment settling over them like a blanket. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. Elias's breath caught. "Yeah? Yeah, it terrifies me, but yeah." A slow smile spread across his face, the most genuine, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. "Good," he said, "because I'm already there. Have been for a while now." And then he was kissing her, gentle and careful and sweet, his free hand coming up to cup her face like she was something precious. Mara's eyes fluttered closed, and she leaned into him, into this moment, into the terrifying, wonderful reality that someone loved her, that she loved him back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably make this official," he murmured, "with a preacher, so Borden can't use it against us." "When?" "Soon. But Mara—" He pulled back enough to look at her. "Not because of the sheriff. Not because we have to. Because I want to. Because I want you to be my wife in every way, not just on paper." "I want that too." "Then we'll do it right. We'll go to town, find a preacher, make it legal and binding, and then—" His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Then we figure out the rest. Together." "Together," Mara echoed, and the word felt like a promise. They went into town the following Wednesday, riding double on Elias's horse because it felt right to be close, to feel his solid presence at her back. Mara wore her blue dress, and Elias had put on a clean shirt and his best hat, and they rode into Dry Creek like they owned the world. The stairs started immediately. People stopped on the boardwalk to watch them pass. Whispers followed in their wake, but Mara kept her chin up and her hand rested lightly on Elias's arm, and she didn't look away. The preacher was a kind man named Reverend Thomas who didn't ask questions or make judgments. He married them in the small church with only Henry Walsh as a witness. Henry, who'd ridden in when he heard they were coming, who stood up with them and smiled through the whole brief ceremony. "Do you, Elias Crow, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Mara Collins, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Elias kissed her there in the church, with sunlight streaming through the windows and Henry beaming beside them, and it felt like sealing something that had already been decided, like making official what their hearts had already known. After, they signed the registry and Elias paid the reverend. Henry clapped him on the back and hugged Mara tight. "Congratulations," he said. "You two are good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Thank you," Mara said, "for being here, for everything." "Wouldn't have missed it." He looked at Elias. "You taking her to the general store? Let her pick out something special." Elias grinned. "Planning on it." At the general store, Mara chose fabric for new curtains and a set of nice dishes to replace the mismatched ones at the cabin. Elias added a bag of peppermint candies and a book of poetry when he thought she wasn't looking. The woman behind the counter, the same one who'd been so cold to Mara before, actually smiled. "Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Crow." "Thank you," Mara said, and meant it. They were loading their purchases onto the horse when Sheriff Borden appeared, his expression sour. "Heard you got married," he said without preamble. "We did," Elias replied calmly. "All legal and proper now. Any objections?" The sheriff's jaw worked. "No objections, just surprised. Didn't think this arrangement would last." "Then you don't know my wife very well," Elias said, and there was steel in his voice. "She's stronger than you gave her credit for. Stronger than most people in this town." Borden's eyes flicked to Mara. "Seems you've done all right for yourself, Mrs. Crow." "I have," Mara said. "Better than all right, actually. I have a home, a husband who respects me, a life that's mine. That's more than I ever had here." "Well," the sheriff tipped his hat stiffly, "best of luck to you both." He walked away, and Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You all right?" Elias asked quietly. "Yes." She turned to him, saw the concern in his eyes, the protectiveness. "Actually, I'm better than all right. I'm happy." And it was true. Standing there in the town that had mocked her, dismissed her, made her feel worthless, standing there as Mrs. Elias Crow, with a husband who loved her and a life stretching out before them, she was genuinely, completely happy. They rode home as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. When the ranch came into view, Mara felt her chest swell with emotion. This was home now. Really, truly home. Elias helped her down from the horse, but instead of letting go, he pulled her close. "I have something to tell you," he said. "What?" "The partition. In the cabin. I'm taking it down." Mara's heart skipped. "You are?" "If you want, if you're ready. We're married now, really married, and I—" He looked almost shy. I'd like to share a bed with my wife. If she'll have me. Yes, Mara said immediately. Yes, I'd like that. That night, after they'd put away the supplies and made dinner and sat together watching the stars come out, Elias dismantled the partition. The canvas came down, the wooden slats were stored in the barn, and suddenly the cabin was one room again, but different now, shared differently. They stood on opposite sides of the space, suddenly awkward. I can sleep on the floor, Elias offered. If you're not comfortable. I'm comfortable, Mara interrupted. I want you here, with me. He crossed to her slowly, took her hands. We don't have to rush anything. I know. I just want to hold you. Is that all right? Relief and tenderness flooded through her. That's more than all right. They undressed modestly, backs turned, and when they finally lay down together in the bed that had been only hers, Mara felt Elias's arm come around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was warm and solid, and she could feel his heartbeat against her spine. This okay? He murmured. Perfect, she whispered. They lay there in the darkness, listening to each other breathe, learning the shape and feel of sharing this intimate space. After a while, Elias spoke. Mara? Thank you. For what? For standing up to the sheriff, for choosing to stay, for... His voice caught. For seeing me, for loving me. Mara turned in his arms until they were face to face. In the moonlight filtering through the window, she could just make out his features, the strong jaw, the gentle eyes, the face she'd come to love. Thank you for choosing me, she said, for seeing past what everyone else saw, for giving me a chance to be someone I never thought I could be. You were always that person, Elias said softly. You just needed someone to remind you. She kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring everything she felt into it. And when they finally settled again, wrapped around each other, Mara closed her eyes and let herself believe in happy endings. Because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Winter came to Wyoming with a fury that first year, blanketing the ranch in snow that reached the windowsills and turned the world into something pure and white and starkly beautiful. Mara woke each morning to find frost patterns on the glass, and Elias already stoking the fire, bringing warmth back into the cabin before she even had to leave the cocoon of quilts. They'd been truly married for 3 months now, and the rhythm of their life together had deepened into something profound. Elias no longer hesitated before touching her. His hand would find hers across the table. His arm would settle around her shoulders when they sat by the fire. His kiss would wake her gently each morning. And Mara had learned to reach for him too, to initiate affection without fear of rejection, to believe that his love for her was as solid and real as the mountains standing guard over their valley. But it was the letter that arrived in late January that brought everything full circle. Henry Walsh delivered it personally, riding through a break in the weather to hand Elias an official-looking envelope with a territorial seal. Mara was rolling out biscuit dough when the two men came inside, both stamping snow from their boots. "Coffee's hot," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "What brings you out in this weather, Henry?" "This." Henry nodded at the letter Elias was turning over in his hands. "Came through town yesterday. Territorial courier said it was urgent." Elias broke the seal and read silently, his expression growing darker with each line. Finally, he looked up, his jaw tight. "What is it?" Mara asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Sheriff Borden's filed a complaint with the territorial governor. Says our marriage was conducted under duress, that the original pairing was coercive, and that the territory should investigate whether the arrangement should be dissolved." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "There's going to be a hearing in Dry Creek 2 weeks from now." The air went out of Mara's lungs. "They can't. We're legally married." The preacher, "Doesn't matter if Borden convinces the territorial judge that the whole thing started from an illegal mandate." Elias's voice was bitter. "He's arguing that because the original pairing was forced, anything that came after is tainted." Henry swore under his breath. "That's horseshit, and everyone knows it. Knowing it and proving it are different things." Elias set the letter on the table, his hands clenching and unclenching. "He's got 2 weeks to build his case. We've got 2 weeks to tear it down." Mara's mind was racing. After everything they'd been through, everything they'd built, the thought of some judge deciding her marriage wasn't valid, that her life with Elias could just be erased. It was unbearable. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Elias looked at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, the kind that came from facing the possibility of losing something precious. "We need witnesses. People who can testify that this marriage is real, that it's based on genuine affection, not coercion." "I'll testify," Henry said immediately. "I've seen you two together. Anyone with eyes can see what you have is real." "That's a start," Elias said. "But we need more. We need to show that Mara's here by choice, that she's thriving, that this isn't some kind of—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Some kind of what?" Mara asked quietly. "Some kind of situation where I'm taking advantage of a woman who had no other options." The words came out hard, angry. "That's what Borden's implying, that you only stayed because you had nowhere else to go." The accusation stung because Mara knew exactly how it would look to outsiders. The heavy girl nobody wanted, paired with a widower by a cruel sheriff's decree, staying out of necessity rather than desire. It was a narrative that fit every cruel assumption people had made about her for years. But it wasn't the truth. "Then we tell the truth," Mara said firmly. "We tell them exactly what happened and why we chose each other. And if that's not enough—" She stopped, a thought crystallizing. "We bring them here." "What?" "The judge, the officials, whoever's conducting this hearing. We bring them here to the ranch. Let them see our life, our home, how we live." She gestured around the cabin, the curtains she'd sewn, the dishes they'd chosen together, the rocking chair Elias had built for her, the small signs of a life truly shared. "Let them see that this isn't just a legal arrangement. It's a home." Elias stared at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "That could work, if we can get them to agree to it." "We make them agree," Mara said. "We don't go to them. We make them come to us, on our terms, in our space." Henry was nodding slowly. "Smart, real smart. Hard to dismiss something when you're standing in the middle of it." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Elias wrote to the territorial office, formally requesting that the hearing be conducted at the ranch rather than in Dry Creek, citing the hardship of winter travel and the need for the judge to see the full context of their living situation. To everyone's surprise, the request was granted, possibly because the territorial officials were curious, possibly because winter made travel difficult regardless of location. Mara threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even her. She cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, baked bread and preserves, organized their modest possessions to show the care she took in maintaining their home. But more than that, she prepared herself mentally for what was coming. She'd stood up to Sheriff Borden once before. Now she'd have to do it again, in front of officials who held her future in their hands. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She lay in Elias's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, trying to memorize the feeling of safety and belonging she'd found here. "What if they take this away?" she whispered into the darkness. Elias's arms tightened around her. "They won't." "But what if they do?" "Then we fight, we appeal, we do whatever it takes." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Mara, listen to me. I'm not losing you. I don't care what some judge says or what the territory mandates. You're my wife. This is our life. And I'll fight heaven and earth to keep it." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." His honesty was a gift. "But we're going to face this together, just like we've faced everything else." She turned in his arms, found his mouth in the darkness, kissed him with all the love and fear and desperate hope she felt. He kissed her back just as fiercely, and they held each other through the long winter night, drawing strength from their connection. The judge arrived at mid-morning with Sheriff Borden and 2 territorial officials in tow. Judge Harriet Blackwell was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority that made even Borden stand straighter. She surveyed the ranch with an assessing gaze as Elias and Mara came out to greet them. "Mr. and Mrs. Crow," Judge Blackwell said. "Thank you for accommodating this unusual request for an on-site hearing." "Thank you for agreeing to it, Your Honor," Elias replied. The judge's eyes moved to Mara, studying her with an intensity that made her want to fidget, but she held still, kept her chin up, met the woman's gaze steadily. You must be Mara Crow, formerly Collins. Yes, ma'am. I've read the complaint filed by Sheriff Borden. I've also read your marriage certificate and the statements from Reverend Thomas. Now I'd like to hear your side of things. She gestured toward the cabin. Shall we? They gathered inside the cabin, too many people for the small space, but somehow they all fit. The judge took one of the chairs at the table, and her clerks positioned themselves to take notes. Sheriff Borden stood near the door, his expression smug. Henry Walsh had arrived earlier and stood in the corner, his presence a quiet support. Judge Blackwell pulled out a folder and began. Let's start with the facts. On September 15th of last year, a territorial mandate gathering was held in Dry Creek for the purpose of pairing unmarried individuals. Mrs. Crow, you were present at this gathering. I was, Mara said. And you were paired with Mr. Crow by Sheriff Borden's directive? Yes. Did you have any choice in this pairing? Mara felt Elias tense beside her. This was the crux of it, the question that could unravel everything. She chose her words carefully. Not in the initial moment, no. Sheriff Borden pointed at me and told Elias to choose me. But Elias could have refused. He didn't have to agree. But he did agree, the judge said. He did. Why? The judge looked at Elias now. Why did you agree to this pairing, Mr. Crow? Elias's hand found Mara's under the table, squeezed gently. Because I saw what was happening. I saw how the sheriff was humiliating her, how the whole town was treating her like she was less than human, and I couldn't stand by and let that continue. So it was an act of charity? Sheriff Borden interjected. You felt sorry for her? No. Elias's voice was hard. It was an act of recognition. I recognized someone who'd been made invisible, someone who deserved better than what she was getting. I chose her because I saw her, really saw her. Judge Blackwell made a note. And Mrs. Crow, when Mr. Crow chose you, how did you feel? Mara took a breath. Terrified, confused. I thought it was a joke or some new form of cruelty. I couldn't understand why he'd do it. When did that change? Gradually. He brought me here to the ranch and gave me space. He slept in the barn so I'd feel safe. He treated me with respect, not because he had to, but because that's who he is. Mara's voice strengthened. He built me a rocking chair. He bought me books. He taught me about the ranch and never made me feel stupid for not knowing things. He made me feel like I mattered. And you fell in love with him, the judge said. Yes. When? Mara thought about it. I don't know if there was one moment. It was more like I kept finding reasons to trust him, kept seeing evidence that he was genuine. And somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't want to be anywhere else. Didn't want to be with anyone else. Judge Blackwell turned to Elias. And you, Mr. Crow? When did this arrangement become something more for you? Pretty early on, Elias admitted. She's strong, resilient. She worked hard, never complained, never expected me to solve her problems for her. She faced everything head on, even when she was scared. He looked at Mara. I admired that. And admiration turned into affection, and affection turned into love. So you're saying this is a genuine marriage based on mutual affection? I'm saying this is the realest thing in my life, Elias said quietly. I was married before. I know what it feels like to love someone, to build a life with them. What I have with Mara is just as real as what I had with Sarah. Different, but just as true. Sheriff Borden made a disgusted sound. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that the original pairing was coercive. Mrs. Crow had no real choice. I had a choice, Mara interrupted, her voice ringing clear. I could have left. Any time in these past months, I could have walked away. Elias never held me here against my will. He never threatened me or manipulated me or made me feel trapped. Where would you have gone? Borden challenged. You had no money, no family support. I would have figured it out. I'm stronger than you think I am, stronger than you ever gave me credit for. Mara stood, facing the sheriff directly. You want to know why I stayed? Not because I had no other options, because I found something here I'd never had anywhere else. I found someone who sees my worth, someone who chose me not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that's not coercion, Sheriff. That's love. The silence that followed was profound. Judge Blackwell was watching Mara with an unreadable expression. The clerks had stopped writing. Even Borden seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, Henry Walsh spoke up from the corner. "If I may, Your Honor." "Mr. Walsh, is it? You're here as a witness?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm the Crow's neighbor to the east. I've known Elias for years, and I've gotten to know Mara since they married." He stepped forward. "I've seen them together, I've shared meals with them, worked alongside them, and I can tell you without a doubt that what they have is genuine. The way they look at each other, the way they work together, the way they've built a life. That's not something you can fake." "And you knew Mr. Crow's first wife?" the judge asked. "I did. Sarah was a wonderful woman, and Elias loved her deeply. When she died, I thought he'd never recover. But Mara brought him back to life. She didn't replace Sarah. She became her own person in his life. And he did the same for her. They saved each other." Judge Blackwell sat back, steepling her fingers. "This is a highly irregular situation. The territorial mandate was meant to encourage permanent settlement, not to create situations of dependence or coercion." "With respect, Your Honor," Mara said, "the mandate itself was coercive. Forcing people to pair up in a public square, treating us like livestock, that was the coercion. What Elias and I have built from that beginning is the opposite of coercion. It's two people choosing each other freely, every single day." The judge studied her for a long moment. Then she looked around the cabin, taking in the carefully tended home, the signs of shared life, the way Elias and Mara stood side by side, united. "I need to confer with my colleagues," she said finally. "We'll step outside." The officials filed out, leaving Mara and Elias alone with Henry and Sheriff Borden. The sheriff looked furious, his face mottled with anger. "You think you've won," he said to Mara. "You think your little speech changed anything." "I think I told the truth," Mara replied calmly. "Something you wouldn't recognize if it stood in front of you. You're nothing but a—" "Careful, Borden." Elias's voice was soft but dangerous. "Speak to my wife with respect or don't speak to her at all." Borden opened his mouth, then closed it. He stalked to the far side of the cabin, radiating fury. Henry touched Mara's shoulder gently. "You did good," he said quietly. "Real good. I just told them what's true. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." They waited in tense silence for nearly half an hour. Mara could hear the officials conferring outside, their voices low and serious. Her hand was clasped tight in Elias's, and she drew strength from the solid warmth of him beside her. Finally, the door opened. Judge Blackwell entered first, her expression grave. "After careful consideration and consultation with my colleagues, I've reached a decision." She looked directly at Mara and Elias. "The original territorial mandate gathering, while legally sanctioned, was conducted in a manner that prioritized efficiency over human dignity. However, what matters in this case is not how the pairing began, but what it has become." Mara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. "Based on the testimony presented, the evidence of a genuine marital relationship, and my own observations of your living situation and demeanor toward one another, I find that this marriage is valid, consensual, and based on mutual affection. The complaint filed by Sheriff Borden is dismissed." Relief crashed over Mara like a wave. Beside her, Elias let out a breath he'd been holding. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her voice hardening, "I will be recommending to the territorial governor that future mandate gatherings be conducted with significantly more oversight and sensitivity to the dignity of all participants. Sheriff Borden, your conduct during the original gathering has been noted as questionable at best." Borden's face went purple. "Your Honor, I was following orders." "You were enjoying yourself," Judge Blackwell said coldly. "There's a difference between enforcing policy and humiliating people. I suggest you learn it." She turned back to Mara and Elias. "Mr. and Mrs. Crow, your marriage stands. I wish you both well." "Thank you," Mara managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." After the officials left, Borden trailing behind them in furious silence, Mara collapsed into Elias's arms, finally allowing herself to shake with the relief and fear and overwhelming gratitude she'd been holding back. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Elias corrected, pulling back to look at her. "You stood up there and fought for us. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. He cupped her face in his hands. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. Henry cleared his throat. I'll leave you two alone, but Mara, he smiled at her. Welcome to Wyoming. Officially. After he left, Mara and Elias stood in the cabin that was truly, legally, irrevocably theirs. The winter sun was streaming through the window, painting everything in gold. I love you, Mara said. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I love you, Elias Crow. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. He kissed her softly. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me right back. Always, she promised. I'll always choose you. That evening, they sat together in the rocking chair, both of them crowded into the space meant for one, laughing at the awkwardness of it but unwilling to move apart. They watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and purple and gold. What do you want? Elias asked suddenly. For the future, I mean. What do you want our life to look like? Mara thought about it. I want this ranch, this land, building something together, maybe more horses, maybe children someday, if we're blessed with them. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But mostly, I just want this, you and me, facing whatever comes, together. That sounds perfect to me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mara said, I should write to my mother, tell her about the hearing, about the marriage being validated. Do you think she'll care? Probably not, but I need to do it anyway. Need to close that door properly. She looked up at him. I spent so long trying to be what she wanted, trying to earn her love. I need to officially let that go. What will you tell her? The truth. That I'm happy. That I've found a life that's mine. That I hope she finds peace, but I don't need her approval anymore. Mara smiled. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And she was. The girl who'd been mocked in a town square, who'd believed she was unworthy of love, who'd spent years making herself small and invisible. She'd become a woman who fought for her marriage, who stood up to authority, who knew her own worth. The transformation hadn't been sudden or magical. It had been gradual, built day by day through Elias's steady presence, through the work of building a life together, through learning to see herself through eyes that loved her. Spring came eventually, as it always did in Wyoming. The snow melted, revealing the earth beneath, and the ranch burst into life. Hope, the foal born on that long-ago night, had grown into a beautiful yearling. The herd had expanded. The cabin had new curtains and a garden plot where Mara planted vegetables and herbs. One morning in April, Mara woke to find Elias already gone from bed. She dressed and went outside to find him standing by the corral, watching the sunrise. She walked to him, and he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking about? She asked. How different life looks now than it did a year ago. How much better? Because of the ranch? Because of you. He kissed the top of her head. A year ago, I was just existing, going through motions. Now I'm living again, really living. Mara turned in his arms to face him. I feel the same way, like I was asleep for years and finally woke up. We woke each other up, Elias said. That's what love does. And there, in the Wyoming dawn, with the land stretching endless and beautiful around them and a future full of possibility ahead, Mara Crow knew exactly who she was. Not the girl nobody wanted, not the woman chosen out of pity or defiance. She was someone who'd been seen, chosen, and loved. Someone who'd fought for her own happiness and won. Someone who'd learned that worth wasn't given by others. It was recognized, honored, and celebrated. She was home. Not just in this place, but in herself. And that, she thought as Elias kissed her in the morning light, was the greatest gift of all. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman who knew she was worth choosing. And she lived happily, authentically, completely, for all the years that followed.